I know this one a lot of people were looking forward to. We're going to learn DIY bookmaking with Resi. I'm going to pass it over to Resi.
Great, thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. My name is Resi Ibanez. I'm a local poet, a local writer. One thing I really like to have a lot of around because I use them a lot are notebooks. So I'm excited to do some make your own notebooks today. I think they're a really fun thing to make, and you could make them look pretty cool by using some art you might already have lying around the house, like some greeting cards, and we're going to be sewing our books together today. So when you buy a notebook in the store, books are bound usually in one of two ways. They're either bound with glue, and when they're done that way, they're called perfect bound. Other notebooks that you might find, especially if they're thinner, might be sewn together. So this is an example. You can see kind of the different sewing marks that were made in getting this book together. So we are going to be sewing our books together today. We're not going to be sewing it as much as this. It's going to be a little easier. And we're going to be using greeting cards that you might have lying around the house. So this is an example I made earlier, and we're going to be sewing them all inside. So pretty easy way to make some cool art that you can carry around with you and use. I know I usually get greeting cards and I feel so bad throwing them out because, I love the sentiment from people who give them, and I don't want to put them to waste by throwing them out. So this is a great way to reuse that kind of art that you get from the people who send you cards. So we're going to get started. So one of the supplies that we're going to be using today, I just prefer regular old office paper. I think it's a little easier for your first book because you don't have to worry about the direction of lines or margins, things like that. For something like a greeting card, I wouldn't grab a thick stock of office paper. So this is actually just 10 sheets of office paper. The way that I'm going to be folding and cutting them up, and the way that I'm going to recommend we do this today, you'll actually get 8 sheets of paper in your notebook from 1 sheet of a regular office paper. So if you grab 10 sheets of printer paper, that'll give you an 80-page notebook. If you grab 12 sheets, I wouldn't go much higher than 12, you get 84-page notebook. So I have 10 sheets here. So let's get started with that. So this is the card I'm using today. And what I'm going to do to get started is just to hold up the card against the paper to see how this sizing works out. And it looks like, we're going to get some kind of margin between the edge of the card and where the paper is, which I'm okay with. I don't mind, and if depending on the card you're using too, you could also cut down the card exterior to make it line up more exactly with where your page ends are going to be. So I'm just going to hold up just to get an idea of the layout, and I'm doing this so I can tell which way I want to fold my pages on the inside. So using this kind of layout here, I think what I'm going to do is take this 8.5 by 11 paper and fold it in half, kind of fold it down in a way to get it a little shorter. This is going to be our cut line. So once you get this section folded here, I'm going to take my scissors. So something that you can do to get this fold kind of really nice, crisp, even edge is just run the handles of your scissors along the fold. So I'm actually standing up because I find it easier to make books while I'm standing up. So just leaning against the table surface in front of me, I'm just going to press down with the handle of the scissors against the fold. And again, that just helps make it kind of really nice and crisp, a little easier for you to cut. So once that is done, I'm going to cut these along here. And I'm going to do the same to the other stack of paper that I have. You know your own scissors best, so I've kind of split up my pile into 2 sheets of 5. If you're comfortable doing more sheets of paper with the pair of scissors you've got, go for it. So I'm going to cut these up here. And I'm going to do the same with the other stack that I have. So what I'm doing to fold is just kind of like do our basic fold this way. And then I'm trying to see, maybe we could get a view of the work surface. What I was talking about with getting a good crease here, using your handle of the scissors, just kind of press along the crease that you've got. When you're doing bookmaking like this, I mean, it's a lot of folding, it's a lot of cutting, so kind of making sure you get those folds really easy for you to handle is kind of, it makes the process easier as you go along. Since we're using greeting cards today, we don't necessarily have to worry about folding the spine of the book. But if we were making a book with cardstock, you know, that's when these folding bits become really crucial and really important. All right, so I've got my stack of pages here. And we're going to be doing kind of the same thing again. So just kind of a view. So here's our card. This is our cover, right? These pages are going to go inside as like this. And we're going to sew it down the middle to create our spine. So what we have to do that is do some more folding, fold all of these pages in half this way, like how we would fold our book. So again, kind of go about this in, you know, a stack of, choose like a stack size that's comfortable for you to handle. So I'm gonna go with maybe about 4 or 5 half sheets like this, just because that'll be easier for me to cut out later. We'll do our folding. So like I said, I use a ton of notebooks around as a writer. I use them to write down kind of ideas for lines, for poems as they come to me, or I have another notebook for writing out more full drafts. I have my own journal. So I'm constantly in need of notebooks. And this is a great way to just kind of create a custom one for yourself, or, you know, make your card for your friends. If you're going to give someone a card, make it do double duty. Use the card, and it could be a gift if you make a book along with it. Okay. So I've got my stuff folded up here. And then what we're going to need to do now, so, you know, we have our stack of 80 or 84 pages right here. We're not going to be making the stitch holes in them all together. That's kind of too much for a pair of scissors to handle at once. So we're going to be breaking them up into chunks. Like I said, of 4 or 5 half sheets might be a little easier for your pair of scissors to cut their holes in for sewing. So take one of your packets of half sheets that you folded. We're going to open it up to the middle here. So this is where we need kind of a pen or pencil. We're going to be drawing the outline for 3 stitch holes in this packet of papers here. So put your first marking kind of right in the middle of your line here, as close to the middle as you can get. Approximations are fine. You know, we don't need to be super exact about this. So we got one in the middle right here. We're going to put 2 others that are a little closer to the ends, not to be right at the very end. We want to leave a little bit of margin space. So maybe about ½ inch to a full inch in from the end, depending how this will line up with your cards, how much you want to do stitching on your cards. But you want to put one near the top end and one near the bottom. So here we go. This is what mine looks like. Now, this is just kind of our sample in a way. This is our prototype. This is what we're going to be using to kind of outline and trace the same distance for markings on our other packets and on the card. So what we're going to do now that you have your markings in here, fold your half sheet kind of the opposite direction so your markings are on the outside. So you can see them. And then we're going to be using our scissors and just kind of putting little nicks into the paper. If you can cut out like a tiny triangle along the lines of your markings, if you drew X's, you know, that would work just fine. But just a little tiny nick, it doesn't have to be super large here. This will be where we're going to be sewing. So when we make books, you know, the reason why I'm on my feet a lot is that there's a lot of this marking, a lot of this folding, a lot of this cutting. So I just find it physically easier to be standing up for that. So that's why I'm a bit of a rough angle right now. But we got our template now, more or less, right? So we have our holes nicked out for sewing. So we're going to be using this template to make markings on all our other half sheet packets and on the card itself. And we're going to be doing cutting out of those markings as well. Kind of what it is when you're bookmaking is you're really prepping all your pages, all your cover stock, everything. You're kind of doing all this prep work of folding and cutting to kind of just prepare for sewing. And then sewing will be a breeze. This is a lot of legwork to get there. So that's been my experience with bookmaking. So once we have our template, we're going to be tracing that into our other half sheets. So what you can do is just kind of line it up along your other half sheet packets you have, and using your pen or pencil, just kind of draw in some dots where those original cut holes were made. Okay, so similar, we got our markings, same distance from each other. And then making our little nicks again into the edge of our paper here. This one went outside the spine, but close enough. Okay. So sometimes when people do books like this, if they want to make more complicated patterns, or if they're going to be doing this kind of thing a lot, you could also make a cardstock like sample or template and just move that from kind of packet to packet when you're tracing the outline. You know, and that can be useful for doing more complicated stitching. You know, or if you envision yourself doing this kind of activity a lot, you know, having a cardstock template can live a little bit longer, and, you know, you don't have to, you could just whip it out whenever you need to for making these. One year I decided I would make books for everyone on my Christmas list, and so having that cardstock template really helped because I was doing this a lot. And last packet here. So if you wanted to make ever kind of a thicker book, you know, often if you take a close look at the spines of your books, you might see the pages are grouped together in little bundles, and each bundle is called a signature. And so this is kind of what we're doing is if we were making a more complicated book, each little half sheet packet would be like one of those little bundles. And then we could do like more complicated stitching along the side of it to bind them all together. What we're doing today is kind of the more easiest stitch pattern to get along with. But, you know, once you get that down, you can kind of experiment more with how you want your bindings to be on the spine of your book. Okay, so this is my last signature of pages here. My workstation, as you can see, looks like it's confetti right now. So what I'm going to do now is just trace our template onto the seam of our card. So because we're doing this kind of card binding, there's only one sort of line here I have to deal with of putting this pattern on. Which is really easy. And, you know, this is already folded for us, so I don't have to worry about folding it really sharply. So again, once you have your markings kind of on the spine of your card, fold your card inside out, and that will help you kind of cut out these markings a little more easily, not so awkwardly wielding scissors. And I don't want any like injury hazards happening on this activity, you know, but cutting from the spine in is what I'm doing. So just sort of along that. Cool. All right. So now that I'm done kind of creasing and folding and cutting, I feel a little bit easier about sitting down and getting to actually see you all now. You know, if you're doing this a lot and kind of working with a lot of pages you have to cut out by yourself, it does a number on, I feel like it's doing a number on my back right now a little bit. Having probably an elevated desk might be helpful for this kind of thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to align up all our pages, all our signatures now, just one inside the other, kind of putting this all together now. Now, if you're putting this all together and you notice that your stitch markings aren't lining up exactly, that's really okay. I've done a number of projects where my stitch markings haven't lined up exactly perfectly, and you know, it's totally fine. So this is an example of a bit more complicated book that I tried once with multiple signatures. So this is the first book I tried making, and all these little packets of paper are the signatures, and then this is what the binding on the outside looks like. So you can see it's not completely perfect on this side here. That's really okay. You know, the nice thing about sewing by hand is that you can kind of join up things wherever they might be. So if it's a little bit off from each other, that's totally cool. Okay, so sewing time. I've got right here a regular old sewing needle. So that's what we're going to be using. And for our thread, we're going to be using dental floss. Something you might just have around the house, something that's a little bit durable, which is good. So with my floss, I'm going to be measuring out how much we're going to be using here. So a good rule of thumb when you're making a simple kind of binding like this is to measure out with the floss about 3 times the size of or the distance between your top and bottom stitch markings. Okay, so this is our card here. Here we go. This is our card. So with the floss, I'm just going to measure out here kind of between the top and bottom stitch markings. This is unfortunate that you can't really see, but top and bottom, I'm just going to measure that out 3 times with the floss. Just kind of pull along like that. So that's 2, and then here we go. That's 3. So I'm going to cut it off right here and get this threaded into our needle. Okay, so I'm going to take our pages now, have them all lined up, and I'm just going to hold the pages as they are. I'm going to take this and start threading. I'm going to start threading through the middle X, our first stitch marker that we made. So we're going to go through there. And when you're holding your pages like this, you know, you're inserting your needle from the inside. So it's going to go inside and then out. So inside from your middle stitch marker. If your markers don't line exactly up, you might have to do a little bit of kind of fiddling around with it just to get your needle through. So honestly, what I'm doing is I'm just like holding my needle and then putting my stitch markers through like this. You don't necessarily need to like stab at your pages with your needle. That might be a little frustrating. So I would just kind of hold it up and then pile your pages on with the middle marker coming first. And now that I've got all my pages on, so we're gonna put our card on next. Again, going through the middle stitch marker. So now we're all threaded, which is great. So we're going to pull the needle up, and you want to leave a tail of maybe 2 to 3 inches of floss on the inside. So don't pull it all the way through. And now that we're threaded through our first, we're going to go to the top stitch marker that we made and kind of go back in. So from the card cover back in through all our pages. And again, you might have to do a little fuddling like I am now, just to get it all in. You know, and try to keep that tail of 2 to 3 inches on the inside of your book as much as you can. I know it's hard, like I don't have 3 hands to hold all these things, but just try doing that bit by bit. Okay. Kind of hold your tail of floss down while you pull through. So now that we've got our thread going from middle to top, now we're back on the inside of our book again, and we're going to take our thread all the way to the bottom stitch marker and go out. So something funny is that year when I decided to make books for everyone for the holidays, I actually didn't have a dinner table. My partner and I were living in a studio and just had like a small side table to work on. So it was a little difficult, but it was a fun time and I managed to get it all done. All right, so now we're out here. We've got all our thread going through all our places, all our stitch markers. So now to close it off, we are going to take our needle and go back through the middle, and we're going to go from the cardstock in. And that will finish it off for us and get us to a point where we could just tie a knot and then be done with it at the end. Now, so something that just happened for me is when I was coming through, I actually stabbed my floss from one of my earlier stitches. So try to avoid that if you can. You know, I'm going a little bit fast here because I know we're a bit on a schedule, but you know, while you're doing this on your own, like really take your time about it and pull through. You know, I've kind of unstuck myself from the floss that I stabbed. Okay, so now we're all here, we're all bound. I'm gonna take our tail that we just had from our needle, and all I'm gonna do is make sure that these tails are on opposite sides of our binding middle thread down here. Once they're on opposite sides and I have our binding thread in the middle, I'm gonna tie off with a knot, and then we'll be all good. You know, if you want to, before you tie your knot, kind of pull things through and make sure that the thread is tight for you, just kind of give it a little bit more security when you finish. You know, the floss I'm using is actually mint flavored, so this will have a nice aroma of mint whenever I use it. All right, so I've got our knot here and we're done. So that's a quick, you know, half-hour greeting card book. Now you have about 80 pages. It's kind of mind-boggling to do the math. So 10 sheets of printer paper, once you cut in half and fold them, will give you 8 pages inside a notebook. So that's pretty nice. And we're all good. I did have a slide here that, you know, if you wanted to continue doing bookmaking on your own, there are some tools you could invest in that might help make it a little easier for you, just easier on your hands and that kind of thing. I don't know if we have time to just show that slide right now, Amy. But for binding, you know, so I used a regular old sewing needle, but you could use their special bookbinding needles. They're pretty similar to sewing needles. I actually prefer to use tapestry needles. So they have a bit of a bigger eye and are a little easier to thread for me. We use dental floss today. If you wanted to do something a bit more colorful and not have white thread showing, you could use linen thread. That is a really good bookbinding agent. You know, and you can get that from an art supply store. You could get it from a sewing store. You know, if you get linen thread from a sewing store and it comes in a spool like this, I'd also recommend using some beeswax just to line the thread. That'll give you, thanks Amy, that'll give you some kind of good resilience so your thread doesn't fall apart once you're out and using your book. We talked a bit about kind of getting those folds nice and crisp, so you can use a bone folder to apply that kind of pressure too. And if you wanted to make cutting a little less awkward, you could get a thing called an awl, which is just a nice like kind of hole puncher. So those are some basic tools for bookbinding. You can get those at art supply stores, maybe even some sewing stores might have some of it. So I would recommend checking that out if you want to continue doing this kind of thing. It makes it a little easier. But I'd like to thank you all very much for joining me for bookmaking. Thanks to Lowell Makes for having me too. This was a lot of fun, and now I have these great new notebooks to add to my collection. So hope you all have a great day and a great weekend. Thanks.